So this week I'm with Anas Sarwar, MSP for Glasgow, and Anas is Labour's health spokesperson, and it's the first Labour debate of the session after the summer. So Anas, do you want to start telling me what roughly you're going to be saying this afternoon?
So what happened prior to the election was several local organisations and campaigns highlighted what they thought were proposals coming from the health boards about cuts to local NHS services. It was denied at the time by the government that these services were really under threat, and pledges were made that local services would be protected. But just weeks later we have publications and firm proposals in black and white now from NHS Lanarkshire, from NHS Lothians and Greater Glasgow and Clyde on genuine service changes that are being proposed that I believe will have a direct impact on patient care and indeed on NHS staff. And some of the services I'm referring to, Pauline, are one, closure of maternity services at the Inverclyde Hospital and closure of maternity services at the Vale of Leven Hospital, closure altogether of the Lightburn Hospital, the closure of a paediatric ward in the Royal Alexandra Hospital, centralising cleft palate services away from Edinburgh and into Glasgow, and indeed removing inpatient orthopaedics from the Monklands Hospital. And that's not to mention other service changes that are happening as well as part of the health board's cuts. So what we are saying is we expect the government to hold true to its promises to protect local NHS services. We are asking the government to recognise that these things are on the table, that they're happening, that the government calls them in, and that the minister rejects them. And what we're seeking to do this week is to bring Parliament together, all political parties, opposition political parties, and individual constituency SNP MSPs, to say if you want to protect those local services, please support our motion and let's put our NHS first.
I noticed in the government motion they make reference to major service changes. Is that an important phrase in their motion? So you just said there that you want the Scottish Government to call it in so that they can reject those service changes. So it seems to me that that's quite an important aspect to the debate.
Absolutely. So what the Health Secretary can have cover on is the Health Secretary is saying that she only needs to make a decision on those things that are deemed as major service changes. But the reality is ultimate responsibility lies with the Health Secretary about what is one deemed as major service, and then once it's deemed a major service, whether it's accepted or rejected. But there's an inconsistency. So the REH, for example, which is proposing to close a paediatric service, is regarded as a major service change, and the government will make a decision. Cleft palate services in Edinburgh that are being removed is regarded as a major service change, and the government said they will ultimately make the decision. But the closure of a hospital unit in Lightburn is not regarded as a major service change, so the government's saying nothing to do with us. Same with the maternity service at the Inverclyde and maternity services at the Vale of Leven and the orthopaedics at the Monklands. I think that's an inconsistency. I think all of them are major service changes. The government needs to recognise they're all major service changes, to call them in and reject them.
So do you suspect that they might argue today that this is not a major service change and therefore they don't have to make a decision?
No, it's actually worse than that, Pauline. So the amendment in the government's name actually removes, one, the reference to public concern about the service changes. Secondly, it removes altogether some of the mentions of the hospitals. For example, Lightburn Hospital is not mentioned at all in the amendment. The REH is not mentioned at all in the amendment. Instead, it's a backslapping support of government motion rather than actually genuinely addressing concerns. So it's almost an attempt to say there's nothing to see here, nothing's happening. I don't think that respects the patient groups that are campaigning. I don't think that shows respect to the people who rely on that service. We need to be honest about this. There are service changes that are going to impact on people. They're real, they're in black and white, they're happening in a matter of months. We need to recognise it, and if we care about those services, we need to call them in and get them rejected.
So we've just earlier been outside with some of the campaigners. So as Glasgow MSPs, we're obviously concerned about the Glasgow services. But I was hearing from the group that are here from Edinburgh about the cleft palate surgery service, that they believe that the closure of the Edinburgh service will impact on Glasgow. Now, I don't think that's fully appreciated by Glasgow politicians, would you say?
No, I agree. So one, I should have mentioned the Centre for Integrative Care, which is also part of the closure proposals to remove inpatient services. But the important point about Lothians and the cleft palate services, what we are saying is that this is not a West of Scotland debate. This impacts on people outside the West of Scotland as well, because it will impact on families living in the East Coast in terms of access to cleft palate surgery services. But at the same time, we already have an overstretched NHS in the west of Scotland. So closing a service in the east coast and saying all of those patients we need to come and travel to the west coast to use that service will also add further pressure to those that already access that service on the west, but also inconvenience those on the east. And I don't think it's the right thing for Glasgow, and I certainly don't think it's the right approach for the east coast either.
Just lastly, I wanted to ask you about the possible closure of Lightburn Hospital. So it was saved 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think former MSP Paul Martin was instrumental in saving that hospital, actually. So I'm hearing that that's possibly up for closure.
I think the tragedy about, you mentioned Paul Martin.
Yeah.
The tragedy in that situation is Paul Martin campaigned in the election to say that there are secret proposals to close Lightburn Hospital. He was branded a liar by the opposition candidate who's now the serving MSP. A letter went out using parliamentary resource from the local SNP MP saying that she had been in contact with the Scottish Government and there was no truth to there being proposals to close Lightburn Hospital. Within weeks of that election, Paul Martin has been proved to be right, and there are proposals to close Lightburn Hospital. That's completely unacceptable. You can't say one thing during election campaign and then do the opposite when we're actually back into reality. And I think it's a credit to Paul Martin for the campaign that he has fought in Lightburn in the past. It's a credit to him for the campaign group that he has assembled that is still operational in terms of fighting to save Lightburn Hospital. We've got to make sure that we fight for those patients and those services in the East End of Glasgow.
Well, the debate's starting soon, so I should let you go and lead for Labour. I'll be sitting in the debate, so
thanks, Polly.
Let's hope we win the vote this
Fingers
evening.
crossed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.